Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final Wheelhouse talk of the semester, The Power of Beliefs in Business with Ari Weinzweig. My name is Grace Tummel, and I serve as a program manager for the Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy here at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. Exactly 8 months ago, we were on the eve of Ari's original scheduled visit to Grand Rapids, when the decision was made by Grand Valley's campus to take courses virtual and cancel all in-person events in the face of a pandemic we knew very little about. The Hauenstein Center staff was at the Loosemore Auditorium for an event at the time the call was made, and we rapidly turned the green room at the DeVos Center into a command center. In the 3 hours following that decision by the Grand Valley administration, we were in constant dialogue with each other to form the best plan of action. Had multiple team members on the phone at the same time with our presenters and partners, Ari's team at Zingerman included. Had emails being sent from at least 6 different devices to our event attendees, and we're making live edits to our website to communicate to the public. All while in a hodgepodge mix of seats huddled around a coffee table that was meant for one person. A lot has changed since that fast-paced evening in March, yet a lot has remained. Here we are in the middle of November, and it is clear that providing engaging digital content is both what is best for our community as COVID cases are hitting an all-time high, and is in fact an effective learning environment for our students and community members. Our gratitude for our partners is stronger than ever, as they have remained supportive in our transition from our in-person event with Ari to tonight's digital presentation. Express Employment Professionals, Anderson Eye Care, Atomic Object, Carnivale Jones Group, Essence Restaurant Group, and Kuzi Business Ethics Initiative. I extend my sincerest appreciation for your contributions to bring this program to our community. And after over a year and a half of planning, I could not be more excited to finally bring Ari Weinzweig to you all tonight. Students and partners, I hope you are enjoying a little taste of Zingerman's in the boxes you should have received in the mail. For tonight's presentation, please utilize the Zoom toolbar to submit questions at any point throughout the event. Ari will be referring to a workbook throughout the presentation. Please see the link in the Zoom chat or visit gvsu.edu/HC to access this. I would now like to invite one of our outstanding Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy lead fellows, Hannah Beatis, to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation with Ari. Hannah, please take it away.
Good evening, everyone. As Grace had mentioned, my name is Hannah Beatis, and I am a second-year fellow candidate at the Cook Leadership Academy, as well as a first-year lead fellow. We want to thank you all for being here for a night of insight and inspiring conversation. Our facilitator for tonight, Mr. Paul Jones, is no stranger to the Hauenstein Center. He is a dedicated mentor and supporter of the Cook Leadership Academy, and his continued engagement and membership of the Hauenstein Center does not go unnoticed. He is a native of Grand Rapids and received his undergraduate degree in industrial engineering at the University of Michigan, where he later continued his education by obtaining his MBA at the Ross School of Business. Paul dedicated 37 years of service at Steelcase, and in his retirement enjoys reading, exercise, and bicycling. He and his wife, Diane, share a passion for mentoring college students and young professionals and sponsor monthly speaker series at U of M's Center for Positive Organizations, where guests learn how to apply positive business practices in their lives and professions. There isn't a more fitting person to guide us through tonight's discussion, and we thank Mr. Paul Jones for his dedication to young leaders. Tonight, you will hear from Ari Weinzweig about the ways in which our minds and beliefs can change the way we see our work and the world. Ari co-founded Zingerman's Delicatessen in 1982 with a $20,000 loan, a Russian history degree from the University of Michigan, and 4 years of experience as a dishwasher, cook, and manager of restaurant kitchens. Since then, Zingerman's has grown into a nationally renowned food icon, launching 10 businesses and grossing $55 million in annual revenue. Coupled with his entrepreneurial endeavors, Ari is also an author, world traveler, philanthropist, and a sought-after keynote speaker. He has educated attendees of the Microsoft Expo Spring Conference and Positive Business Conference at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business, to name a few. These men need no further introduction, and we are eager to learn from their discussion together this evening. I now invite Paul and Ari to kick off the Zoom room, the main event.
Thank you, Hannah. Good evening, Ari, and welcome to Grand Rapids,
Great to
at
see
least
you.
virtually.
Well, we've been planning this for like 2 years, so I'm glad that we can make it happen, even if it's virtual.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I thought I would share with everybody how we first met. And I'll bet you don't even remember this.
No, probably not. I'm thinking now what it is.
It was back in 2012, and I had a colleague who asked me if I could introduce him to you because he knew I was a U of M grad, and obviously you guys are in Ann Arbor. There was only one problem. I didn't know you. I took the challenge anyway, and I found a way to make the connection. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And then over those last 8 years, we really continued to build on a relationship through email exchanges, conversations over breakfast at the Roadhouse, and my attendance at many Zingerman workshops and events. In fact, I've got one coming up on December 9th.
Yeah, that's great. Honored to be here.
So we're very happy to have you here tonight. As Hannah mentioned, Zingerman's is known internationally and really is a landmark in Ann Arbor. But I think what people forget is that Zingerman's had a beginning. It wasn't always what it is today. So I think it would help if you would just give us a little bit of history of the Zingermans, starting perhaps when you decided to leave Chicago and come and pursue your degree at Michigan.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's let's see, the 1890s. No, I came to Ann Arbor to go to school at U of M. I grew up in Chicago. I got here and I don't know. I don't think I really knew what I was going to do, but it was time to go to college. And in my family, there wasn't a lot of question that you weren't going to go to college. And I started to take various classes. When I got to junior year, I needed to declare a major. I don't think they had general studies back then. So I picked Russian history because I really liked it and I still like it. And after I graduated 4 years later, I really had no clue what I was going to do. We're not really going to talk about visioning tonight. We're going to talk about it in some other sessions tomorrow. But as you know, and that's part of how you and I bonded, was over the idea of visioning. I had no vision at all. I had what David Whyte, W-H-Y-T-E, the poet and writer whose books I love, and they might be on that shelf. Wow, I see those ones over your left shoulder too, right there. I love David Whyte's books, but he calls it the via negativa. And basically what he defines that as is when you have no idea where you want to go, but you're very clear where you do not want to go. And I knew I did not want to move home. And in order to facilitate that financially, I needed to find a job. So I had driven a cab part-time while I was in school, which was fine, but not all that interesting. One of my roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant in downtown Ann Arbor. So I decided I'd go in there and apply for the same serving job he had. They interviewed me. They said to call me if something opened up. I waited a few weeks, nothing opened up. I went back and reapplied as a busser. Again, they said they'd call me, and I waited 2 more weeks. They still hadn't called me. So I went back because I was totally running out of money. Rent was coming due. And I said, hey, I'll do anything. Do you have anything open at all? And they offered me a job washing dishes. And never having worked in restaurants, I didn't know that was, not the prime position really. I just was happy to get a job. So I said, absolutely. They had me start that night, and that's how I got going. So in my mind, at least, it would, I know a lot of my colleagues in the food business, and they'll say like their grandmother was this awesome cook, or their mother was a wonderful cook. In a few cases, their father was a wonderful cook. And from the time they were 10, they were devoted to the kitchen. Or I been emailing with Ty Martin, whose family, whose mother was big at Commander's Palace in New Orleans. So she like grew up in the restaurant. And I'm like, I didn't have any of that. I grew up on Kraft macaroni and cheese, Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, Cheetos, Fritos, Nestle's Quick, green Jello, and a pretty industrialized American diet. And absolutely no one in my family was in business. They were all teachers, doctors, lawyers, dentists, psychologists, and stuff. So I was kind of the failure of the family for not getting an advanced degree. But anyway, I stumbled into this work that I love. I still love cooking. I'm a cook at home pretty much every night. And I also met great people. So Paul Saginaw, as you know, who's been my partner in all this for all these years, was general manager when I started washing dishes. Frank Carollo from the Bakehouse was a line cook, and Maggie Bayless from Zing Train was a cocktail waitress. So we've been working together probably twice as long as a lot of the people on the call have been alive, but that's okay. I look at that as a really awesome problem. As you know, it's a wonderful thing and not that common in life. And I wish that for a lot of people on the call, is that there's 3 or 4 or 5 people that 40 years from now, you're still really close to and feel good being around. So I started prepping and line cooking. Frank started teaching me how to cook. And then, as Hannah said, I started managing kitchens. And I worked for that restaurant group for about 4 years. For those who know Ann Arbor, Paul left about halfway through that and opened Monahan's Seafood Market, which is still one of the best fish markets in the US. And it's actually 39 years ago, and what's today, the 12th, 12 days ago, I gave 2 months notice. So it would be November 1, 1981. It was just, I didn't really hate going to work, but it was less and less inspirational. And I could sense more and more, even though they didn't have a written vision, where they were going and where I was going were not the same place. So I gave 2 months notice, totally unclear about what the future would hold, but it was just time to do something else. And Paul and I had talked as friends off and on over the years. He had grown up in Detroit, where you could get good deli food, and in Chicago you could get it, but you couldn't get it in Ann Arbor. So we would bat around the idea of opening a little deli at some point. And he didn't know I'd given notice, but the landlord of the building across the street, which is now the deli, called and said, "Hey, my building's coming open. Do you want to look at it?" And Paul called me, and somehow within like a week, we decided we were going to open. And somehow miraculously, 4.5 months later, we were open. I say miraculously because now it takes 4 months to get a meeting set up when everybody's in town and not booked.
So when did you decide that rather than franchising, because you were so successful, that you were actually going to create this community of businesses?
Well, from the beginning, I always wanted really always one place. I mean, it's always been in my whatever ethos, ethics, belief system. We're going to talk about beliefs tonight. I can speak to it more clearly and coherently by far now than I could have in 1982. But and I actually wrote a little pamphlet called The Art of Business that's kind of addresses this idea. But I always was drawn, and still am drawn, to the restaurants, to the businesses, to the musicians, to the artists, the poets, whatever it might be, that are really doing interesting creative work. And I don't look at franchises as evil, but I've never gone into one and been excited to go in unless it was to use the bathroom on the highway. It's pretty much a neutral experience at best. It's fine, but life is short, and I always wanted to create some sort of, a special place where people would be literally, emotionally, and then physically driven to come a long ways to go to, and someplace that you would just remember as this amazing experience that was going to be really unreplicated anywhere else in the world. So I knew that from the beginning. That was a big piece of the vision that we had in our heads that we never wrote down. The actual vision for the community of businesses, I just referenced it yesterday, actually, in the e-news, which you probably saw, but Paul and I wrote in 93 and published in 94. And that was the first time that we actually did visioning in the way that we now do it so frequently. In fact, it was kind of rudimentary compared to what we do now, but it was our first effort at it. It was about 6 pages long. And that's where we described that in 15 years, i.e. the year 2009, we would have this community of businesses. Each would be a Zingerman's business, so they would be interconnected, but we could have each one have its own specialty, so we could retain the uniqueness, the specialness, the originality of the deli itself, and then of each of the new businesses we would open, and that each business would have managing partners in it, because I never experienced the model of, with all due respect to managers, because there's some wonderful managers in the world, we have some ourselves, but when the owner's on site in general, there's a different energy and a different feel, and that the whole thing would operate synergistically, which I always feel like sounds like kind of a 70s buzzword, but actually the literal meaning is that if I help you then am inadvertently helping myself. And if I help myself, whether I meant to or not, I'm helping you. And the work around that actually came from Ruth Benedict, the anthropologist in the 1930s who studied Native American tribes and found that the healthiest, most successful ones were the most collaborative in that way. So that's when we rolled that out.
So then you kept building. I think you've got about a dozen businesses now. You were rolling into 2020 at 60 plus million in sales, I believe.
Yeah, close to 70 actually. Yeah.
And then COVID hit. And I'd like to have you spend a little bit of time explaining how you responded really in each of the businesses, because our students this year are studying a leadership competency, which is how to respond to ambiguity, uncertainty, and how do you keep moving when you don't have all the answers. So if you kind of share what some of your businesses have been doing.
Well, I guess let me back up to what you're saying that people are studying, because I guess what I would say is it's always ambiguous. We never have the answers, really. We have answers, but we don't have the answers. And that we never really know what we're doing. And I think it took me a long time to understand that even the people who are doing their work well still don't really know what they're doing. They just do a better job of managing to get through that. So it's not like we really had it all down before the pandemic. That said, I've been working on a piece about culture, and you're well familiar with the whole model of the ecosystem I've been working on as organizational ecosystem, and culture in that model I look at as the soil. And I started to realize the obvious, which is healthier cultures do better in the course of a crisis, right? They hold together better. In the same way that on a farm, if you have healthy soil and you squeeze the soil and you open your hand, it's going to basically stay in shape. Whereas if you have dry, exhausted soil, it's just going to blow away. And it's the same with culture. So in a crisis, the culture holds together imperfectly, but much better in a crisis. Whereas an unhealthy culture will just basically decompensate or disintegrate. So what have we been doing? So we've just been trying to do what we know how to do. We have in a good way, the healthiest ecosystems in nature, going back to the ecosystem, are the most diverse. And one of the things that I don't know that we were so wise in '94 when we wrote that vision of the community of businesses, but one of the upsides of it I've always felt is the diversity of the businesses, so that we are a little bit protected from crises, because in the same way that the ecosystem is more resilient when it's diverse, whereas monocropping, i.e. growing 5,000 acres of corn, may look efficient, but it actually is very vulnerable to pests or whatever. So we have everything from our mail order, which is having by far the busiest year we've ever had, to our food tours, which dropped to 0 in 3 days. And then going up from the bottom, Mara from Zingerman could chime in, but our farm, Cornman Farms, which is an 1834 farmhouse and 1837 barn that we renovated to do events. Obviously not an easy year for the event business, weddings and all that. I think we're back up. We were back up to around 40–50%, but that was pushed up by a lot of fish and chips and a lot of small projects that Kieran and Tabitha took on out there along with the crew. Our restaurants were at about 35% of typical sales with carryout only. And then we've worked our way back up to about 65% over the summer. And now we're going to, like every other restaurant around here, we're going to be challenged by the colder weather and lose all the outside seating essentially. And then Zing Train, I think we're, Mara, about 40%. She could chime in. And then creamery and coffee around 60%. Bakery is close to normal sales or typical sales. A lot of that is helped because we sell so much to mail order, and then mail order, like I said, is booming. So that's sort of the sales profile. Within the first week, we furloughed about 275 people, which is a terrible thing to have to do after spending years to create organizational health and treat people with dignity and involve them so closely in the running of the business. and then be faced with a situation that if we didn't do something like that, we were going to run out of money. And so it definitely has been challenging. There's nothing we're dealing with that everybody else on this call isn't somewhat familiar with. I mean, it's personal health, organizational health, balancing, trying to integrate the health of the individuals that we care for every day, our staff and our customers, with the health of being in business and providing jobs and providing it's not an essential service in the same way that healthcare providers do, but I've heard enough comments from enough people to help remind me every day how much meaning our work brings into their lives. I actually just got quoted in an article in ABC News on Monday, but I referenced a guy stopped me in front of the Roadhouse and, with his little kid in a stroller. And he's like, dude, you guys, like, this has been so much more than a restaurant. This is like my sanity during the last 9 months, because this is where we can come. And one family where the family's been coming in since we opened the deli, pretty much. The kids grew up there. They've moved on and live out of town and have families of their own. But the mother is dealing with some pretty serious disease, and they reached out about trying to cater something a couple months ago, like outside on the block, because she can't travel, and it would be a way to do it in a safe way. So, I mean, just realizing like that kind of connection and continuity is a huge piece of the culture of the town's ecosystem that we, and humility that we provide. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but.
Well, but just like all the students at Grand Valley went online instantly last spring.
Yep.
Zingtrain was basically an in-person training company.
Yeah.
And basically your sales went to zero. And they wrote basically an eight-week vision.
Yep.
And they did a phenomenal job of turning a in-person training company into an online training company.
Yeah.
I think once this pandemic is over, it's going to serve you, I think, greatly.
Yeah. I mean, as you well know, I mean, there's an essay I wrote in part 1 of the book, which here's my super beat up copy. That's called 12 Natural Laws of Business. And it's my belief that all healthy organizations are living in harmony with those. And one of them is the reality of our human existence is that our strengths lead to our weaknesses. And I used to think that my strengths and my weaknesses were sort of engaged in this existential battle in my soul, that I was, hoping and praying that my strengths would win, until one day it dawned on me that they were the same, right? It's just a continuum. And that if you follow the continuum far enough from whatever you're really good at, you're going to get to what you're not good at, and vice versa. So in this case, the pandemic, I came to look at it sort of in the ecosystem model. I spent some time trying to figure out how a pandemic fit, and I settled on an earthquake in the ecosystem, because like an earthquake, it was unexpected. Like an earthquake, some parts are untouched of the community, some parts are devastated. Some things, the building looks fine, but inside it completely collapsed. Some people are killed, holes open in the ground, and people disappear. And that's a little bit of what it's been like. So rebuilding that has been a big challenge for everybody. But like you said, so Zingtrain's strength was in-person training. What's the weakness? If you can't get anybody in person, you're in big trouble. But I think part of a resilient organization and a resilient person and a high hope person, which, I've written about that too, is that people have the tools to be able to, I'm tired of the word pivot, but they have the tools to be able to adapt to the changes in the ecosystem and come up with effective and creative ways to do that, right? So if you know how to work and you know how to collaborate and you know how to give great service, those are universals. And whether you're selling from a fancy restaurant in the earthquake or you're selling from a patched together plywood lemonade stand, it's customer service is the same, teamwork is the same, et cetera, et cetera. So to everybody's credit at Zingtrain, absolutely. And then now we have the opposite. Like there's some big upsides to be, it's not my favorite to be online. I'd rather be here where, up there where we could have brought Zingerman's food and had everybody eating coffee cake and whatever. But the upside is for Zingtrain, I mean, we can have people from Australia, New Zealand, France, online for 2 hours, and they don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. So it's allowed us to definitely access more people. I just got an email from a guy in Kenya today that gets the e-news that was responding to what I wrote yesterday about consensus. So we're able to reach people in new ways now.
Speaking of which, besides running the various companies as CEO, as Hannah said, and as you've alluded to, you're a prolific writer. You write the weekly e-news that you've been referencing, which I hope our viewers will go and sign up for later this evening.
It's free, so it's low risk.
Yeah, that's right. You publish a 16-page newsletter 6 times a year, and I know all of our fellow candidates got a copy of that in their gift box. And then you've written at least 7 books. 4 of them are in the leadership series, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. And before we do that, I just want to, for our audience, explain how they're organized. There's basically 49 chapters in these 4 books. And Ari, you call them secrets, and they're all self-contained leadership tips. They can be read in any order. The books can be read in any order. And as part of the gift box that our students got, they also received 2 of the secrets. For secret number 40 that we're going to talk about tonight, and then secret number 35 about visioning that you're going to conduct a workshop with them tomorrow morning.
Yep.
So our topic is really book 4 tonight.
Yep.
Is the power of beliefs in business.
Yep.
And so tell us
have mine
about
right
how.
Yeah, right there.
That's right. So tell us how you got started studying beliefs, and as you just showed us, it turned into a 600-page book. So
yeah.
Get started, and what was the journey all about?
Yeah, it got started really. You and I, part of what I think, there's many things that you and I have bonded over and connected over, but one of them is I think a deep love of books and of learning. And I was reading Bob and Judith Wright's book, Transformed, which Mara will probably nearly instantaneously drop the link to. Bob Wright wrote the foreword for part 3, which is where the secret on personal visioning that people got. So he wrote the foreword for that, and How I Know Him is written up in the end notes of the book. But anyway, I was reading their book, Transform, which I would recommend. It's quite a good book, and I don't remember what page it's on, but I stumbled in the middle of the book onto this little belief cycle, self-fulfilling belief cycle. And at the time that I saw it, as so many things in life, you see it at the right time and it connects with an issue that you're struggling with. And if I had seen it 2 years before, I might have kind of noticed it, but not had it click in the way that it did. But it wasn't cataclysmic, but I was struggling with an organizational frustration that I'd been working on, trying to figure out and get resolved for like a year. And everything I had tried, visioning, diversity of the work group, all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't really working the way that I wanted it to. And it had to do with a quality issue. So it was pretty close to my heart and important. And when I read this self-fulfilling belief cycle, it clicked to me immediately what was wrong, which is people on the work group, despite their qualifications, despite everything else, they were going through the motions, but they didn't really believe in the work. And maybe they believed it was everybody else's fault, not theirs. And they were fine, but everybody else needed to change or whatever. But it really struck me. It opened up my mind in an interesting way. And it sounds crazy because I had already written and studied and spoken on leadership and all sorts of subjects, but I just had never thought about beliefs. And in this context, I'm not really speaking of religion or politics or even sports, although those are also beliefs that fit this as well, but really more beliefs about work itself, about our colleagues, about our significant others, about ourselves, about how much work is too much work, about what good coffee is. Can you tell the difference about uh, all sorts of things? And so I did really the thing that history majors can do. I just started studying. And the more I studied because the more I was learning and the more fascinated I became. And I started to realize really that the belief stuff was everywhere. I mean, it was our whole lives, our beliefs, and our essentially every action and decision that we make, including being on this call tonight, is based on what we believe, right? So there's some things that are instinctive, like if you're dying of thirst and you see water, you're going to drink it. But beyond that, or swerving if somebody throws something at you, pretty much everything we decide to do, what we have for dinner, who we spend our time with, how we spend our time, how we feel about the time we spend. I mean, all of that's based on beliefs. And so we essentially have thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And what blew my mind probably more than anything else was most of us don't even know we have them. And yet our behaviors are based on them. B, we don't realize that we can change them because we've been deluded by our families out of good intentions, by the world at large, to believe that what we believe is reality, right? But I mean, there's a lot of women on this call today. If we had done this call, if you could have had a Zoom call in 1850, there would be very few women on, because it would have been very much not completely unacceptable, but almost, that you would have women in a higher educational setting. I mean, women in the United States weren't allowed to be school teachers up until like the 20s if they were married. I mean, so there's things that were accepted as truths that clearly were basically just beliefs, and they do change over time. So that's what got me going, and here we are. And this last year, without getting into politics, has demonstrated one of the key parts of it, which is that what you believe alters what you see, because there's a little filter, which in science would be called confirmation bias, and we all filter out all the information that doesn't fit our beliefs, and we take in what does fit our beliefs. And then as a result, two people can see the exact same thing happen and arrive at totally opposite conclusions. So without getting into sides on the politics, it does explain why people have experienced this the whole year that we're not quite done with. I'll be glad when we are, but we're not quite done with, in such opposing manners.
So I know what really struck you in the Wright's book Transformed was the belief cycle.
Yeah.
Tell us how that works.
So I don't know if we want to, Mara, is there a slide? You're going to show them the slide on there. So it's a round cycle. And if you imagine at 12 o'clock at the top is the way we started, are our beliefs. So again, we have beliefs about everything, really. What it means, is 7 o'clock too early to get up? Is 7 o'clock late to get up? Is it bad to work Sunday? Is 40 hours the right number of hours? Is 60 hours crazy, or is 30 hours lazy? Right? These are all beliefs. So what we believe leads us to take action. So in this round cycle, which I think Mara put the PDF or the JPEG or whatever in this chat. At 3 o'clock, you would see our actions. So based on what we believe, we're taking action. Based on our actions, the people around us that we interact with are going to form beliefs of their own. At 9 o'clock, you would see their beliefs leading them to take action. And what blew my mind is that it turns out like 95% of the time, the action that they take reinforces what you and I believe. Okay. So, I mean, a couple examples that I use pretty regularly. I mean, one is if we were, it's probably not relevant for any of us on this call, but there's a lot of organizations out there in the world where the CEO, the founder, the leader, the president, whatever, he or she believes that training is a waste of time, right? Clearly you and I are not in that company, but there's a lot of them out there. If the leader, the CEO, if he or she believes training is a waste of time, what action will they take? Clearly they'll do no training. What will the people who work there then believe about the company's belief in them, about their potential growth and development? Clearly they're going to believe there isn't a whole lot of opportunity for development because nobody's feeding them new learning. then what kind of work do you do when you don't believe the future is that good? You do the least work you have to do, because what's the point? And the CEO goes, man, thank goodness we didn't spend any money and time on training, because look how bad these employees are. It would have been a big waste of time. Conversely, if you have the belief that you have and that we have at Zingerman's, and I'm sure a lot of people who've taken time to be on this call have also, what do? We believe training is a fabulous investment. We're spending money on it. Even in the pandemic, when we're losing money, we're still trying to figure out ways to spend on training, because we are going to get through this, and we want to have people who are engaged and growing. What do the people who work here then believe? That we believe in them, that they have a big future potential, that they can grow and develop as human beings and as parts of this organization, that they're going to learn skills that they'll take with them, whether they're only here for a year or whether they're here for 20 years. That are skills that are going to help them have a better life. So when you have all that going for you, what kind of work do you do? Pretty darn good work. And then we go, man, this training's so great, we should have done more. Right. So, I mean, this is going on all day long. It's happening in interpersonal relationships. If you have if a professor, not it would ever happen here, but if you had a professor who believed a student was doomed to fail, or a loser, or not committed, how will they treat them? They'll distance, they won't engage with them. They'll see all the things the student did wrong. Follow the belief cycle. When the student feels like the professor's not engaged, what kind of work will they do? Pretty poor work. And the professor says, I knew they were going to fail. Now, so this isn't just about the professors. The student can do the exact same to the professor. They can make up all sorts of stories about the professor who they don't know. The professor might be having some issues at home. They might have a relative who's got coronavirus that they're worried about, right? They might have been distracted, but they can quickly be judged by a student. I'm sure I did it when I was in school. Well, he's a terrible professor. And if you believe that, you stop paying attention and you get nothing out of the class, right? And the professor thinks you're not paying attention. So this cycle's going on all the time. No joke, countries go to war over it.
So you also write quite a bit about how if your behaviors are out of alignment with your beliefs, you get in trouble. Explain that to us a little bit.
Yeah, so this is something we all have been dealing with our whole lives, and I guess whatever therapy and our life's work is to get them into alignment. But if, because beliefs are not genetic, beliefs are all learned. And so when we're little kids, we're learning them from who we're most we're always learning them from who we're most influenced by. But when we're little kids, that's mostly our families, and then social pressure to conform. So, it could be anything as simple as if you grew up in a family with loving, highly critical parents who kept whatever you did wrong, telling you were clearly not smart, or you can't play the flute, or, you're never going to make it as a musician, give it up. But your dream is to be a flautist, but you still hold that belief that you can't really do it because mother, God love her, told it to you so many times as a young child, that even though on the surface you've chosen to believe you can do it, there's still this deeply held belief inside that we may not even acknowledge. It's, I love my mother, but the voice is still in there telling me I can't do it. And those two are out of alignment, right? If they're out of alignment, it's going to be like whatever metaphor you want to use, trying to drive our car out of alignment, or at 18, you don't realize this as much, but when your back is out of alignment, I just talked to Paul, my partner on the phone, who's a few years older than me, he threw his back out. When your back's out of alignment, is very painful. And so it's the same in our lives. If we have a vision of the future, but our beliefs don't support that we can get there, like if you have this internal low self-image, like I'm kind of a loser, but I really want to achieve at this high level, it won't work, right? If you have work you're engaged in, you took on a project because your boss asked you to, which is not a bad thing, but you really don't believe in it, the odds of doing great work are very low. If you're on a basketball team and you believe the team's going to lose, it's not a guarantee, but it's very hard to fight through things to come out on top if you believe that you're losers. So this is going on all day long. And then it translates into social issues too. I mean, pick your metaphor. If you grew up in a community where racism was a dominant belief, but it didn't sit right with you as a 9-year-old, there's a lack of congruence that causes enormous tension. I mean, if you were a 7-year-old in Germany in the 30s and you had a little kid who was your friend who was Jewish, but everything you were learning was the Jews were the most evil thing in the world, it doesn't match. And so there's a lot of tension and anxiety, unhealthy anxiety that comes from that.
So I know that you believe that complexity of nature is wonderful, which it is, but you've simplified beliefs into really 3 categories: neutral and positive.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I guess that Maggie from Zing Train really helped me to learn to do was to find methods, recipes, frameworks, intellectual frameworks that are not hard to understand, but that also don't demean the natural complexity of the world, right? So the conversations in the world at large frequently will say things like, women want X, which just seems so silly to me, since I don't know how many women are on the call. We'll divide 114 by 2. I'll say there's 57 or whatever the math is. Those 57 are not the same person. And even Hannah or Mara or whoever's on the call may not even want the same thing tomorrow as they want today, because they're human and they're evolving and changing their minds. So I want to honor that constant change and complexity, but still find models that allow us to process what's going on in the world and assimilate our own beliefs and our own dreams into that. So the visioning that we'll do tomorrow is one example of that. We have an 8-step recipe for doing it that we're going to teach, but what goes in the vision is always coming from the individual, right? So we're not here to say, this is what you should put in your vision. It's just, this is a way to write a vision from the heart and tap into what you want and end up with something that's completely unique to who you are and honors the uniqueness that you have as a human being. The same with the beliefs. Was I started to look at beliefs. I mentioned earlier culture, looking at that as the soil in the ecosystem. I started to look at beliefs as the root system, because so clearly, like, everything that grows above the soil line is clearly, everybody knows, even if you're not a farmer, it's 100% correlated to the root system. So if you plant tomatoes, you're not going to get beets. Like, it's not rocket science. And so I started to look at beliefs as the root system. They're underground. You don't really see them, but everything that you see in behavior above the surface line is totally correlated. And then I started to look at them in, as you said, 3 categories. So negative beliefs, neutral beliefs, and positive beliefs. Neutral beliefs don't do much. And then if you follow the root system metaphor, negative beliefs, clearly, when they get above the surface line into our day-to-day behavior in real life, will translate into negative actions. You always get negative outcomes from negative beliefs. Positive beliefs create positive outcomes. Now, some people react to that and go, so is that Pollyanna, like there's no problems? And it's like, no. There's plenty of problems, but you can have a negative belief about a problem, like we're screwed, we're helpless, essentially we're victims, we can't do anything. Or you could say, this problem is extremely difficult and challenging and critical, but if we work together, we write a vision, we align around that vision and do the hard work to make it happen, we can come up with a solution that's really going to make a difference. So the problem is actually identical. What's different are the beliefs around it. So this is not about pretending there's no problems or just always pretending everything's great and it's going to go away. To the contrary, it's saying we have some big challenges clearly in the country right now. We have some big challenges, but if we work together, we can get to a positive outcome.
Great. So why don't we take a break right here? And Hannah, do we have some questions from the audience that we can answer at this point?
Yeah, we do. Okay, so one of the questions we have is, what is one common thing, action, or behavior that those who build healthy communities or cultures do?
I don't know, but I guess in the current construct, I could say that they have positive beliefs, because if you have negative beliefs, my experience is you can get a lot of action out of negative beliefs. You can get people fired. You can tear down communities. You can tear down culture, organizational cultures. You can get people fired, but you will never create positive ecosystem health out of negative beliefs. And to be clear, like, negative beliefs at a small scale could just be like, he's a jerk. But negative beliefs at a big social scale include racism, anti-Semitism, the belief women can't be leaders, the stereotypes that exist all over the world about various groups, et cetera. So I think without question, if you look at the leaders who have created something amazing and have created something generative where the people in the ecosystem are benefiting, it's always based on positive beliefs. And many of them, like, pick who you want, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, whatever. I mean, they were dealing with enormous challenges that they were trying to make change in, but they still had this positive belief that they could create a future.
Great. So building off of your comments about beliefs, we have a question. How can people prone to negative thoughts or thinking overcome that and begin to practice positive beliefs? Is there anything that you do specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I grew up, I just wrote a piece in the e-news, and the archive is up there. Mara can post the link to it about 2 weeks ago about worrying, because I grew up in a very nice, loving, middle class, big worrying family. So I mean, I'm like, if they gave out degrees in worrying, my family would have been PhDs, absolutely. And you know, I was a good student as a kid, so unconsciously I learned how to do it too. In the context of the visioning that work that we'll do tomorrow, I've come to realize over the years, worrying is essentially negative visioning. You just keep imagining long enough, you're going to fail the test, or the relationship's not going to go well, or everything's going to come apart. And eventually you start to unconsciously behave in ways that actually create what you've imprinted in your brain. And the bad outcomes we say that we're trying to avoid are actually what we will unconsciously create. So I grew up with lots of negative beliefs, a lot of positive ones too. And I look at it like weeding our ecosystem, right? They're in there, but we got to get them out. And if anybody's done weeding, you know that 3 days after you weeded, what do you got to do again?
Do it again.
It's never done. It's for the rest of our lives. The difference that I've learned, and I wrote a couple pieces about why leaders are weeders, and that doesn't mean smoking pot, is that leaders are weeders because we need to constantly be pulling the weeds. And I've learned from hands-on, if you let the weeds go for a long time, they're gigantic, and it's very hard to get those deep roots out. And it's no joke. If you pull the weeds a day or 2 or 3 after they sprouted, it's super easy. You can be I can do it while I'm on the phone. It's not hard at all. So this is the first step, Hannah, I would suggest, is becoming conscious of what our beliefs are. There's some exercises in the book or at the back of the pamphlet that everybody got. There's more in the book that helped me to become mindful of what they are. Another thing that I do every day is journal every morning. I've written a lot about that. It's another tool that's really helped me. So when one's journaling, it's like in here, there's just stuff going on. It's like a big, whatever, I say pinball machine, y'all would say video game. I mean, it's going on like crazy all the time. And if we never empty our brain, then however old you are, you have that many years worth of chaos and craziness, and it's getting squished in there more and more and more and more and more. And everybody on this call knows what happens when their computers over too many. I get yelled at by our IT people because I got too many things open. The computer can't handle it, and eventually it crashes, right? So it's the same with our brains. So having the regimen of journaling every morning helps me clear my brain. And then it also helps me catch myself, because if I start writing negative beliefs, I'm like, okay, and I don't have to yell at myself. That's a negative belief. I just, same way we all do no matter who you are, we're imperfect. We do it a little bit wrong, but if I catch it daily, it's so much easier. And then just over time, it's work. I mean, if you're 20 and you got 20 years of root system, you're not going to get rid of it in 20 days.
Right. All right. So we'll do one more question, then we'll get back to your guys' conversation. So connecting off of that, where you said you find yourselves, or from growing up, the whole worry thing. In a climate right now, what would your advice be to individuals interested in starting a business and or expanding a business, especially in a tough economic climate right now?
Yeah, well, the essay I referenced earlier, 12 Natural Laws of Business, which is in part 1 of the book, I think my belief is that all healthy organizations, whether it's an educational institution, a church, a family, a basketball team, or a business, all of them are living in harmony with those 12 natural laws. So Paul worked at Steelcase for a long time. I'm going to suggest from the outside looking in, imperfect though they are and we are, they were living in harmony with a lot of those natural laws for a long time. I think anybody you admire, it could be your mother, your minister, anybody that you look up to, you're going to find they're living in harmony with those natural laws. So for anybody who's working on a business, absolutely, that's a good place to start. And the first one on that list is having a vision. So, we talk a lot about vision as the cathedral that we're working to build. We'll talk more in detail about that tomorrow. But I think a lot of when people get to the point of expansion, frequently they've fulfilled that original vision. They built their cathedral, but they just keep adding on because the workmen keep coming and they got the money to pay them. So pretty soon the original elegance of that edifice is lost to a second story that was tacked on and a pool added on the back and a nice deck on the front and a hot tub on the side, and it all makes sense in its own, but you had this amazing, beautifully elegant design that was your original place. And I'm not saying not to grow, but to have elegance in the vision for the growth too. And in the context of the art of business, I really do look at business and life as not as art or music or poetry. And I think putting the same elegance and beauty into the world that we would do through that is really important in the business. John O'Donohue's amazing philosopher, writer, Irishman, and he said that we're suffering from a crisis of ugliness. And he said that long before the present crisis of the country and the world. He wrote it like 15 years ago. And I think he's right, though. And one thing I've come to realize is that beauty and ugliness cannot they can't be at the same time. So the more beauty you and I put into the ecosystem, into the world, the less ugliness. And beauty could be in the form of greeting somebody with dignity. It could be helping somebody that you know. It can be in noticing, like just, you're wearing a nice pendant tonight, Hannah. I mean, it's small. Well, I mean, it's small things too. It doesn't have to be in this glamorous thing, like just looking, I can spot a lot of good books behind Paul's shoulders on the shelf. So it's just, there's beauty in these tiny little things. And then there's beauty in what we design, whether it's an organizational system, how we intake new people, that you can put beauty into that too. And then in the bigger picture, what kind of business or organization we create.
Great. Paul, I'm not sure if you had any other questions for Ari, but we have a few flooding in, and time is getting a little short. So however we want to go forward.
Why don't Ari and I continue for a few minutes and then we'll answer those at the end.
Great.
Good job, Hannah.
Past 8 o'clock, so I don't think anybody will complain.
No worries. Perfect.
So Ari, you a minute ago you talked about the various exercises that are in the book, and one that I particularly like is this I believe exercise, a way to really get at the subconscious of what your beliefs are on a given topic. First, explain the exercise a little bit to us, and then I want to explore some times when you actually used it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a piece of it came from what I had already learned from Stash Kazmierski, which we'll teach tomorrow about the visioning. So one of the key tools of doing visioning the way that we teach it a tool that helped me enormously was what he called the hot pen, or we call hot pen, which is essentially, if there's any English majors on the call, it's free writing. So you're going to sit down and just write from the heart without editing. You don't stop. Your hand or your hands keep moving. If you're on the computer, it's both, but that you keep writing as fast as you possibly can in order to override the interruption that the conscious brain will throw into the mix. One of the natural laws I mentioned earlier is strengths lead to weaknesses. So by definition, everybody on this call is pretty smart, and y'all are pretty well read. And that's an awesome strength. The downside is we can overthink everything, right? So the more you read, you and I know this, the more you could see one book says go to this way, the other book says go this way, one book says more engagement. So it's easy to overthink, but the speed writing essentially undercuts that overthinking. So I took that and then transposed it into This I Believe, which I like the name because it came from the 1952, I think, CBS radio series, Edward R. Murrow, that was called This I Believe, and then it was recreated by NPR, revived by NPR in the, I think, early 2000s or late 1990s. And anyway, but the idea of it is simply you sit down, pick a subject. It could be about yourself. That's a very revealing one. And you write as fast as you can for like 5 minutes. What do you believe about yourself? And most of us will start with what we think we should believe, but the faster you write and the more diligent you are, pretty soon you're going to come out with the other stuff. And to the question that Hannah channeled earlier about negative thoughts, like if they're going to come out, I mean, it doesn't make you a bad person. We all have them, right? But if you don't even know that you have them, it's like a secret agent in your brain that's manipulating what you're doing, but you're not even acknowledging its presence. If you know that it's in there, you can fight back in a healthy way. And so This I Believe is helpful, and it could be about a person you work with that you're really frustrated with. And almost all of us in that case, when we sit down and write stuff, we're going to write like, he's a jerk. I believe he doesn't care. I believe he, but once it's out of your head, like when it's in here bouncing around, it's basically, we're like puppets on a stage and we're the marionettes and the beliefs are pulling the strings, to switch metaphors. And once we know that that's what's going on, then we can say, okay, where did that belief come from? And then in the book, I mean, I talk through a lot more, like, what if you change the belief, right? So a really common belief we've almost all encountered in the Midwest is we're driving somewhere and somebody swerves in front of us and cuts us off, and they're going really fast, right? So almost all of us will react with the simple, like, man, what a jerk. He's going to kill somebody. It's terrible. How could you drive like that? Clearly he doesn't care about other people or whatever. But like, this taught me the obvious, like, we don't really know. His wife could be in the hospital, and he just got a call at work to say she's in the emergency room and he's terrified. It could be that he's late for his daughter's wedding party. I mean, we just don't know. Like, there's so many things that could be going on that actually are positive stories that we could tell ourselves. And when we choose the negative belief, in that case, like, he's a jerk, what happens? Our tension levels go sky high. The odds of us having an accident go up. The poison is like in us. So it's now we've got the toxin. And if we're not on top of it, we're going to walk into our meeting and go like, man, this guy cut me off. I couldn't believe. And now we've like poisoned the whole meeting with this negative belief system. And if we do the other one, which is we have compassion and we choose consciously the positive beliefs, we have a much better chance of having a better day ourselves. And what did we gain by being mad at him? He's long gone.
So in the book, you and this is actually in Secret 40, so our students all have this in front of them. You write about what you believe about business.
Yeah.
About 5 pages of beliefs.
Because that's what I did. I did a This I Believe, and that's what came out.
Exactly. And so I'd like to kind of wrap up our time together with exploring one, since you're a huge fan and you've been greatly influenced by Robert Greenleaf and his books on leadership.
Yep.
And in the book, you write one of your beliefs is the leader's job is to serve the organization. So tell us a little bit about that. What's the
Yeah,
story?
like I said, I mean, beliefs are not genetic. We're taking them in. They're being formed all the time. I mean, again, without getting into national issues, you can see it playing out right now by which news you watch or by what newspaper you read. It will alter your beliefs. A lot of my beliefs were obviously, like everybody on here, were formed by our families or our early teachers or whatever. But as an introvert who likes to read and feels safest with a book, so in the context of self-fulfilling, part of what happens is the same with you. We like reading. I don't feel comfortable in groups. So when I'm anxious, I retreat to a book. Well, the more you do anything, the better you're going to get at it. The better you get at it, the more you like doing it. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So it creates this cycle where I don't know that I was really such a great reader as a genetically formed child, but all these years later, I'm always reading. So I learned how to read. I learned to like reading, whereas I've met people who are super smart, but they just haven't read a lot. It doesn't make them bad people. But if you sit them down for the first book they're going to read in 5 years and it looks like this, they're going to freak out. And every page is going to be painful because it's awkward, right? So the beliefs around that really came out of that "This I Believe" exercise, and the Robert Greenleaf book. I think Paul read it like in the early 90s and he gave it to me or recommended it to me and I read it. And to the context of what you brought up earlier, we didn't have negative beliefs about servant leadership. We just never heard of it. So we had basically neutral beliefs. And once we read it, though, it really resonated. And essentially, it's the idea, as you said just a minute ago, the leader's job is to serve the organization. That sounds obvious, but I'm going to suggest that in most businesses, although people might agree with the statement, they won't hold that belief because they're going to go, what are you talking about? Like, I started the business to help my family. I started the business so I could make money. I started the business so I could live my dream, right? And I'm not saying those are bad things, but it's the idea that we serve the country, the company first. And I was going to reference what you and I both remember, which is John Kennedy's famous speech, ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. So clearly we want to benefit as individuals. I mean, I'm not saying this is about becoming Mother Teresa and giving up all your worldly possessions, but it's the idea of defaulting to what's right for the group. And doing what we need to do to help the organization and the people in it be healthy, because I have the belief, and Robert Greenleaf had the belief, that if they're doing really well, then by definition, I'm going to be doing well too. Whereas if I'm doing well by extracting everything from the ecosystem and they can't pay their bills and they're left with a spiritually deficient life because we haven't treated people with dignity, then I'm making out in the moment, but it's like strip mining. You do well for a while and then you leave behind this disastrous ecosystem.
So for any of the students who are intrigued by this whole thought of servant leadership, in book 2, and what is it, Ari? Do you remember it? Secret 23 maybe or something is
I don't know. Mara's going to look. I don't remember, okay. But it's in book 2, which is it's right there.
For the students, most of these secrets are available as pamphlets, just like you received. So if you get intimidated, if you're not a huge reader, you can buy just that chapter on servant leadership.
Yeah, and the pamphlets really just historically, I mean, I became interested in it because I read a lot of them from anarchists, but in the early 20th century, pamphlets were basically akin to social media. It was a way to transfer ideas really inexpensively and fairly quickly, because people couldn't afford a whole book if they were poor, but they could buy a little pamphlet and then they would share it with their friends and family and stuff. So, but yes, servant leadership this is my telling of how we've applied Greenleaf's ideas here at Zingerman's.
So with that, I think we should wrap up our conversation. Ari, I really appreciate.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed it, and I hope our audience has a new appreciation for Zingerman's. Do we have some more questions?
I know we do, because there was one from Michael that was in there.
Yes. Let me pull that one up. So from Michael, it says, seems like we are progressing towards a culture of surrounding ourselves with yes men. What is the best way for finding people who don't always agree with you?
Well, thank you, Michael. That's a good question. Whatever you believe, I can guarantee there's people who don't agree with you, and you probably don't have to go that far. I mean, I think there's a lot of tools. I don't know that I have the perfect answer. I mean, one way is, in the spirit of tomorrow morning's work, is to write a vision that says that that's what's going on. Another is this is like self-training for me. So I grew up in a family where people showed love and care by cutting you off and telling you you were wrong. But it turns out that's not a great way to do good listening. So I've tried to train myself to respond when somebody doesn't agree with me. I don't always succeed, but to train myself to keep my mouth shut and do a better job of listening. And that's a life project for me, is to trying to get better at that. So the way that we respond when people don't agree with us will either, if we do it poorly, send people packing because they're going to not want to tell us again. Or if we're open to it and actually learn from what people have told us, then it invites them in and increases the odds of it. And then, it's easier in the moment to have everybody agree with us. But if we really believe that diversity of perspectives is going to be helpful, then it's learning to listen to other people and have compassion for them, even though we may not agree with what they choose to do. That if they can do what they're doing in a way that's not damaging those around them, then it's not for me to judge, really. I don't have to agree.
Right, great. So Mara had dropped a plethora of links and resources in the chat, but we have a question. So who or what other sources, do you personally look to that help guide your beliefs or philosophy?
Well, there's a gazillion, maybe 2 gazillion. I've lost track. In the back of the books, there's reading lists every week in the e-news. I'm referencing other books. I mean, like Paul, we're all constantly reading. I think Warren Buffett said Paul was like 240 books a year or something he reads. I mean, I'm not at that level, but I think it's very clear. Not everybody who reads succeeds, but everybody who gets to greatness in a meaningful way is doing active learning. Now, whether that's books on tape or, I like it on paper, but that's fine. But whatever methodology works, that learning needs to be going on all the time. So I'm happy to recommend, everybody from Robert Greenleaf that Paul recommended. I love Peter Block's books. I love Peter Kestenbaum's books. I just wrote a new pamphlet on humility that's got a lot I learned from a guy named Edgar Schein. Emma Goldman's work from 100 years ago, I was super inspired by. Nobody's probably even heard of her, but I wrote a whole pamphlet on her in honor of her 150th anniversary of her birth last year. Julia Cameron, Brenda Eulin's book, If You Want to Write, which was written in 1937, I thought was phenomenally impactful on me. So there's a zillion. I'm probably reading 5 books at a time.
And I think what you can tell from that reading list is that Ari has a very broad range of things that he reads, which is really important, I think.
Yeah, that's to Michael's question. One way is to get around different people too in what we take in. And part of what I love with books is I can access anything from anywhere. And you can do it online too, but to really read a 300-page book online, I guess you can. People do it, but for me, it's not the greatest. But whatever method is comfortable for you as a learner is great.
Oh, that's great. So because of time, I'm sure we have some other questions, but I'm sure Grace could hook you up with Ari to be able to ask those. I know one of my favorite, you had a lot of like one-liners, and one of my favorites was leaders are weeders. So I will be starting to actively use that.
Yeah, I'll probably put that in the plethora of chat links too. Let me just answer the question, because I see she put it in there and it's a good one. I think that's Can people see it, or you want me to repeat the question?
I think they could see it.
Okay,
They should be.
it's a good question and a big challenge. I guess here's what I wish I could remember, and Paul, who I learned this from, but it was a very helpful article. I think it was in Harvard Business Review. And what they said is that there's a difference between having diversity of perspectives from within the same healthy ethical framework, where you're trying to make the ecosystem better, is not the same as somebody coming from the outside with an attacking perspective that's in complete conflict ethically. So Paul and I, my partner of X and all, however many gazillion years now, we frequently disagree on a lot of stuff, but it's still going towards the same vision, and it's still coming from within the same value system, and essentially a similar congruent belief system, right? So if you come into our organization and you see that our vision talks about diversity, and you go, well, that's crazy, I don't believe in that at all, it's not going to work, right? If you come in and you go, I'm all for diversity, I don't really like those coffee cups you guys have, I was really thinking like green would be a better color. Well, that's healthy because it's bringing an alternate perspective, but it's doing it within the frame of the values and vision and mission of the organization. So it's aligned in the way that that Paul asked me about earlier. So Ashley, I hope that helps. And then Mara just put my email in, so people are more than welcome. I don't have negative beliefs about email, so you're welcome to email me. It's actually true, is that people have negative beliefs about email and they make their life very difficult in the process.
So again, Ari, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
look forward to being with you tomorrow morning in the visioning seminar. And with that, I'll turn it back to Grace.
Thank you. Paul and Hannah, a special thanks to the two of you for helping facilitate this conversation with Ari. Ari, of course, thank you for showing up as your creative, passionate self and sharing your leadership ethos with our group here in Grand Rapids, or really from around the world, wherever people are calling in from today. That's a positive in this pandemic, is that we can all come together in the same time and place.
Well, Grace, let me, when we were in person, I like to close with a quote. So I was just thinking I could do that even though we're on Zoom.
I would love that.
Does that work?
That works great.
So this is a quote from Carl Jung, who I'm sure pretty much everybody knows by name, if not having read things that he wrote. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So I wish that I had known about the power of beliefs when I was 20, because I was struggling with a lot of stuff that I didn't understand why it was happening to me. And I didn't understand that I had the freedom to choose different beliefs, even though they might not have been the ones my parents or my teachers or my friends held. And that having that power to take the unconscious as Jung references and make it conscious is really about the freedom of our lives. And it's almost scary because it's easy to stay stuck in the prison, in quotes, that we've allowed ourselves to be put in by everybody else. But this is really a tool that I think it's helped me enormously. And like I said, I wish I would have had it 40 years ago. So thank you all for the honor of sharing thoughts today. And I look forward to more conversation to come. And Paul, you're awesome and really inspiring to work with you always.
Thank you.
Thanks for starting that reflection for all of us, Ari. I appreciate that. Everyone, as you sign off today, please feel free to take the post-event survey. Those of us who are students and part of Cook Leadership, we'll see you tomorrow morning. Everyone else, hopefully you tune in for next Thursday's event at the Hauenstein Center. Thank you again and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Make sure to check out the PowerPoint
Bye.
that Allie's about to put up here for potential book sales and more information about Zing Train. Thank you all again.
Thank you.